board. And by the way, breaking news, as I'm having this webcast with you guys, CNN is just releasing that there's another 200 billion that is being negotiated in Congress to continue to assist small businesses going through the crisis.
So what does a small business look like? Is it one person business? Is it, 50,000? Is it 250? What's
Great question. So small businesses are defined by the SBA as businesses that have less than 500 employees, right? Now, this is a federal program, but is managed locally by what is referred to as SBA lenders, banks that typically do business with the SBA, right? Now, if you can imagine, there are 30 million small businesses that meet that criteria in the nation. If you look at Massachusetts, there's about 400,000 businesses that meet that criteria, right? So everyone or a big component of those businesses are in the process of applying for these programs.
So are there three different programs, three different packages? If so, can you just quickly?
Correct. Yeah, they're more than three. These are just the federal programs. I'll start with the federal programs, and I'll start with the federal because the state is also lending a hand to small businesses. Mass Growth Capital and Mass Development, which I happen to sit on the board of directors of, joined forces to put together a $20 million fund. These are for even smaller businesses, right? Those funds have largely been exhausted, right? That's at the state level. I think the city of Boston just announced as recently as 2 or 3 days ago, a small business support fund, again, for smaller businesses with under $1.5 million in revenues, right? But my remarks are largely centered around the federal programs, which are really where the big dollars are coming into play. There are three of them. Would you like me to walk through each of them, or?
Walk through each one. And I think after you go through one, let's talk a little bit more about it and then go to the next one.
Yeah. So the first one, and one that you have probably heard of from most recently in the news, is called the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, right? The PPP is designed to provide quick relief to small businesses that are going through the crisis, right? It's actually a very simple application process once you have identified an SBA lender, and that's not an insignificant challenge, and I'll get to that in a minute, right? But basically, it allows you to get a loan up to 2.5 times your average salary for the last 12 months. And please note that average salary calculation needs to be normalized. If you have any employees that make over $100,000, they get capped at $100,000. And salary, it really includes payroll costs. So that includes healthcare, salaries, 401k contributions, all your people costs divided by 12 months. If you look at your 19,000 account, 2019 accounting records, that's your average salary. You multiply that number by 2.5 times, and voila, that should be a number that once you submit payroll documentation, you should get quickly approved to receive 3 to 5 business after the days after the loan application has been approved. There comes a challenge.
Okay, that's what I was getting.
There comes a challenge. The loan application is very simple. You can apply for the loan in about 5 or 10 minutes if you have all your records handy. The problem is that you have hundreds of thousands of people applying at the same time.
Right. But before we go into the requirements, let me ask you, if it's a small company that it doesn't really have employees, this and the owner is the employee, this really doesn't go for them.
Well, yes, it does, right? So the way the PPP works, there are 2 application windows. First, they're from companies and sole proprietorships. That window opened last Friday. Okay. On April 8th, it will be for self-employed and independent contractors, right? So this is a frequently asked question, right? So if you have a company and you have payroll, you're in really good shape. If you have a company and you're yourself, or you don't necessarily have payroll, you have contractors, there's a lot of nuances to that, right? If you are just an individual contributor in your own company, you can fundamentally apply for your compensation, right? So you would get a loan applicable to 2.5 times your compensation up to 100,000. Again, the $100,000 caps applies everywhere, right? The other nuances is that independent contractor, the reason the law is written that way is because independent contractors can in turn apply for themselves, right? So that wave of application will happen from April 8th on.
Okay,
But I
super.
also want to make sure I manage expectations around timing, because when you got 15 million small businesses in the nation going for the door at the same time, the banking industry is really struggling to keep up with the volumes, right? Most SBA, first of all, not every bank is an SBA lender, right? And the SBA is admitting new bank members into that club as a result of this very quickly. But they still need to develop an operating process for receiving, 10,000 applications. Eastern Bank, which is the largest SBA lender in the region, rack up $1 billion in loan applications in the first 48 hours. So I think it was 800, $900 million, right? So now understand, and I don't want to bore you with banking details, but the SBA lender takes in the application and follows the underwriting guidelines that the SBA has given them. Those underwriting guidelines were not even clear until last week, right? So banks are in the process of digesting the data, taking some basic information. They're doing it online because that's the only way to keep with the volume, right?
And
You don't want a list of a long line of small business owners outside of the branch, right? So that's what's going to happen. I think it's going to take a week or two for the banks to get used to this volume processing, right? And we should start seeing some money flowing. By my guess, will be over the next couple of weeks.
okay, so the PPE, talk
PPP,
PPP,
yeah,
talk to me about what the requirements are.
yeah. So basically, you have to be under 500 employees, right? You got to have, for the most part, you have to have payroll that you can substantiate. You got to have a legal entity or form of ownership that you can substantiate. You got to be a U.S. citizen and all that stuff, right?
Right,
Uh,
the approval, that's what I meant. Talk to me.
Oh, the approval on the other side, once you've submitted your documentation, as long as you're using the funds for intended purposes.
Okay,
Intended purposes are threefold: people costs, utilities, and rent, right? So the whole program was designed so small businesses can continue to operate in the middle of crisis, right? So in comes the loan forgiveness factor, right? Which is for the period February 15 on, you get to pick 2 months that your people cost, your rent and utilities, to the extent that your loan proceeds were used for that purpose, will be turned into a grant, will be forgiven. So example, if you get a loan for $100, right? And that was, 2.5 months of average payroll, right? And let's just say that your monthly payroll, utilities, and rent is $35, right? The US government will pick up for 2 months. So that means that 35 times 2, that's 70. That means 70% of that loan will be forgiven, right? It gets even better. Whatever is not forgiven, you don't have to pay any principal and interest for 6 months. And when the loan begins to amortize, it's only an interest rate of 1%, right? So this money looks a lot like grant money, and it should be treated like a loan obligation. But the reality is that if the proceeds are used for their intended purposes, a big chunk of it will be a grant.
okay. And so individuals that are applying for this, or companies, small businesses, um, what are they looking at if it's a small business that hasn't been operational for a year? What does that look like for them?
In that situation, it would be a little bit more complicated. You got to have evidence of, the whole purpose here was to make sure that the economy continues to move, right? So you got to have evidence of economic activity, right? So you don't have any revenues or expenses, or very little revenues or little expenses, it's usually a problem, right? This was intended for the restaurant, the hairstylist, the barber shop, that all of a sudden they were told by the government, we got to shut it down, right? So the government's basically going to give those small businesses a 2-month lifeline.
which is unbelievable.
It is crazy. It is crazy. It's really good. And that's why, it started at 350 billion, give or take. And they're talking today of adding another 200 billion, right? By the time we're done, it'll probably be closer to a trillion, right? Um, and I strongly encourage all small businesses to get really smart at this. Frankly, some of the biggest hurdles that need to be overcome, we've seen this with some of our clients that we have that are small businesses. They don't have good accounting records. They haven't done their taxes in a couple of years. They don't understand their cash flow, right? So you got to have a good handle on your financial and accounting environment. So when you get that phone call to talk about your loan, you can articulate, all right, this is my payroll, this is what I do, this is what my forecast, right? That discussion becomes a little bit more important in the second loan program, right? Which is,
Talk about that because
yeah,
2, 3, and then I want to talk about how you can help in the
yeah.
program.
So the second loan program looks and smells a little bit more like a traditional loan. It's called the EIDL, or in the trade, it's now being referred to as the idle, right? Because the economy is on idle, right? And those letters stand for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, right? These loans are up to $2 million, right? At a rate of 3.75% if you are for profit, and if you're not for profit, of 2.75%. This loan requires a little bit more documentation. However, it won't require collateral or personal guarantees as some other traditional SBA loans, right? You do have,
Or it will not.
will not, right? It would, credit score would be a consideration, right? Um, and you need to demonstrate evidence of impact, right? If you're a growing business and you apply for this loan, you're probably not going to get it, right? If you're a business that you're not growing, but you're floating in liquidity, you got millions of dollars in cash, you're probably not going to get it, right? So this one requires a little bit more analysis around what is your bankability and how do we best position your case for receiving that loan, right? If you are in industries that could easily demonstrate uh, evidence of impact from the crisis, right? You have your accounting records, and only you have a good credit score, you're probably going to get that loan, right?
Is that the personal credit score or the business credit score?
Mostly personally, small businesses are so closely related to their owner, so it's mostly the personal credit score, right? Um, by the way, the SBA has been also um, explicit that if you don't have a credit score, right, it's not like that's going to rule you out, right? But having a good credit score will definitely help you in the process, right?
So for this second type of the idle program, what type or what size business normally qualifies for that?
Same thing, under 500.
Okay.
Under 500. By the way, the PPP, right, is up to 10 million, right?
Oh,
Yeah. So there are small businesses that carry that big of a payroll, right? But the reality is that even though it's up to 10 million, the average deal size for the PPP is about 200 to 300,000 bucks. The folks that are taking advantage of this are the real small businesses, right? Every once in a while, you're gonna have someone that's gonna go for a big number, but most likely the average deal is under $500,000, right? The idle is gonna have a much larger deal size, right? Those are businesses that, again, can demonstrate an economic impact and have pretty good evidence to get you to the other side of the crisis. One of those things that when determining the loan amount is not just how much the crisis have cost you, but how much is it going to take you to get back up on your feet,
mhm.
right? So reestablishing working capital, buying inventory again, that type of stuff, right? So determining the loan funding amount for the EIDL is a little bit of a science, right? Um, the one thing that is interesting about that program is the U.S. government hasn't said this, but they really don't want to be funding businesses that were not healthy before the crisis. So if you have a business that had a net loss or was a money-losing business before the crisis, you're probably going to take a closer look at you, right? The whole purpose of this is to take businesses that were healthy help them through the crisis, and get them healthy again, right? It's not about saving businesses that were unhealthy.
Super. Before we go on to number 3, we have a couple questions. I'll let you go, Mama.
I'm absolutely loving this conversation right now. I'm like so excited. All right, so we have 2 questions from Evelyn. The first question is: some banks don't have the COVID-19 loans. Is there any other options?
Yeah, so that's actually a frequently asked question, because everyone rushed to the SBA lenders for these programs. First of all, the banks that offered SBA loans, the first thing that they did was said, we're not going to take anybody that is not our existing client, right?
Mm-hmm.
We understand this business is not good business for the bank. They get paid very little money, and it's just they're doing this as just because they have to be part of the national solution. But this is not a business that they would lead with or make a lot of money on, right? So the SBA appointed a bunch of lenders that applied to and are getting appointed to the process. If you go to the SBA website, there is a find a lender location. There are also a couple of digital lenders that are SBA approved. The 2 that come to mind are Lendio, Lendil, and SmartBiz, right? Those are online platforms that you can submit your information and get underwritten digitally.
Say the second one again, Juan Carlos.
SmartBiz.
SmartBiz,
yeah. Lendio and SmartBiz are quite popular, and people are flooding through. And if this whole issue of not having enough lenders was an issue that the SBA identified right away, right? So, they're deputizing things like federal credit unions, typical entrepreneur banks like Silicon Valley Bank, which was never in the business of doing SBA loans, are now doing SBA loans, right? First line of defense is call your bank and ask them, are you doing SBA loans now? Because if the answer was no a month ago, chances are it's going to be yes now, right? If they're not, talk to a credit union. If try the digital solution, right? Worst push comes to shove, it is not, the market leader nationally right now. It's Bank of America in terms of how they're doing it. I don't want to put an advertising here for Bank of America, but push comes to shove, go open an account at Bank of America and go through Bank of America,
Right. Okay, so let's move to number 3. What's the third option?
So the third ones are, they're smaller value loans. They're basically a series of bridge financing options, right? The government knows that from the time that you start this process to the time that you get funded could be 30 or 45 days, right? So they have established an advanced loan program, right? So if you apply for the EIDL, right, you're gonna get a $10,000 grant, right? If you are approved for the loan, right? So these are bridge financing options, right? There's also a program called the SBA Express Loan, right? These are small dollar value loans that are designed to bridge you, hold you up until you get the big loan coming, right? Again, I would direct folks to go to the SBA website and look at the express loan programs.
Okay, super. Mama, do you have that on the chat? Okay, super. And I think we have one more question, and then we're going to move on.
So Evelyn asks, some of the bodegas are cash-based businesses and don't qualify for bank loans. Is there another option?
This is unfortunate, but the first question that I ask anytime that I have a client come to us that I'm a cash-based business, I'm like, why are you a cash-based business, right? Inevitably, that is prevalent in the Latino community, right? A lot of it is because of tax evasion. And a lot of it is because of other reasons, right? So if you have a cash-based business, that doesn't exclude you or preclude you from having a tax return, right? Just because you're a cash-based business doesn't mean you don't get to file your taxes, right? And when it comes to doing business with the U.S. government, your tax return is what matters, right? So if you have been omitting income for the last 3 years, that's going to work against you right now.
So, right, but cash-based, means somebody comes in and they pay cash for whatever they're getting.
Yeah.
That's,
In theory, that's revenue in the tax return. In theory, in practice, it's not.
Right. So they have to then prove that they have that money coming in. So if they have 100 customers paying for adobo, let's say a bodega, then they should be able to show that amount of money.
Yeah, and that's, by the way, this is for the EIDL. For the PPP, it doesn't matter if you're a cash-based business, because what they're looking for is for payroll information, right? Now, if you pay your employees on a cash basis and don't have payroll records, that's a problem, right? That's a problem, right?
Would they qualify, the bodega owners, would they qualify for the program that's starting April 8th, the PPP? I keep wanting to say PPE.
Yeah, no, that's personal protective equipment. That's different. No, this is the payroll protection program. They would qualify, but they have to have, like I said, they have to have their accounting records in order, right? It is never too late to fix your accounting records, right? And this might be the time that you say, you know what, this is worth it to fix it, because I want to get a loan with these terms that could potentially be turned to a grant, right?
Speaking of that, let's talk about how your company can assist in this.
So we're a management consultancy firm. We typically help firms with very complex decisions around growth and transformation, whether it's an acquisition or a turnaround or launching a new product or expanding a distribution system, right? A big part of our business is capital and people management. One of my partners, Marcela Aldaz, which is known to a lot of people in this call, runs our HR solutions practice. And that's relevant because times like this, there's usually layoffs or furloughs or work share programs offered by the state or unemployment questions. And she's been dealing a lot of clients with that. My finance partners are dealing a lot with capital management, out of which the government programs are just one part of the equation, right? The bigger you get, you might get access to private equity and venture capital funds. There are other forms of debt other than government debt. You might be bankable. You might have a bankable business, even though you might be shutting down, right? If you have collateral and cash flows and you have a good balance sheet, right? So we looked at the overall picture and say, all right, this is your capital strategy. This is your people strategy. These are going to bounce back after the crisis to hopefully emerge a little bit stronger, right? There are a lot of opportunities. There's some weaker players that you could be buying. Sometimes there's strength in numbers, right? And we have a pretty good practice around transaction support, just basically helping companies executing on deals.
So you said something in regarding bigger numbers, their strength in numbers. Is this a good time for mergers?
It's a great time for mergers if you're a buyer. If you're a seller, may not be, right? Because you have a valuation that it's typically suppressed, right? So think about it. Same thing happens in real estate right now, right? It's a buyer's market, right? If you're cash rich or have access to capital, these are a great opportunity of buying a smaller player at a discount, right? And negotiating favorable terms, right? A lot of great companies were founded in the middle of crisis. Companies like Airbnb and Uber were launched in the 2008 crisis, right? So everyone thinks it's doomsday, but the reality is that crises create innovation and business models get redefined and new businesses emerge because of crises, right? So you also have to be on the lookout for opportunities. How do I reposition my business model? How do I better utilize the assets that I have, right? Just staying home watching the news is not going to help your situation.
Right. So let's talk about, so we talked about the three programs. Let me just double check. The three programs, the PPE, the EIDL, and the last one was, what was that called? The last one?
The Express Loan program.
Okay, so
it's Express Loan, it's advances on the EIDL. I put them in a bucket of advances that are meant to facilitate your bridge period, right, between now and the time you get your funding in.
So there's also a lot of companies that are offering grants themselves. Like I saw Spanx is offering a small $5,000 grant. It's a quick form. It just went live yesterday. Facebook is offering one. I don't think Facebook is live as well, and that's almost free money.
Verizon, Walmart, Verizon, Eastern, I think every large corporate is trying to do whatever they can to help. Not every, but a lot of them, right? Um,
Is there a place where all this information is, or do you have to individually go to each?
Yeah, so on the corporate sector, no. On the government sector, government, state, and municipality, yes. The university, Duke University, the Fuqua School of Business, has a fabulous website that you can go by state and click in on federal, state, local, and they're trying to do precisely what you just described, which is have a central repository of all the resources that are available. The challenge is that they're changing every day, right? And sometimes they come in and get tapped out quickly. Verizon launched their program, I think something like 9 business days, and I'm told, and I know this is not confirmed, right? I'm told that they stopped receiving applications on Saturday because they were overwhelmed, right? Same thing with mass growth and mass development. We put $20 million on the street and it was gone in like that, right?
You said there's also programs with the city that are coming out.
Just came out. So Mayor Walsh just announced a small business support program. I think it was 3 or 4 days ago. Again, this was designed for even smaller business, under 1.5 million in revenues, right? Quick grants. If you have to be based out of the city of Boston, right? You have to have payroll information again, but it should be, there should be some funding there.
So the trick or the difficult situation would be for the small businesses that launched last year and really don't have a history. They don't have payroll taxes. They don't have the taxes yet because they haven't filed them. What do you recommend for those businesses? Because we're getting
in that particular case, even they should have some kind of payroll support, right? So I am of the opinion that your best strategy is to file for the PPP, apply for the PPP, and then wait for a call back from the SBA lender and have that discussion, right? I think there will be exceptions to the rule. I do think that in some business, I'll give you an example. I have a client that it was a very profitable business, but they bought a bunch of fixed assets last year, so they had a bunch of depreciation. So they're going to have, from a taxable standpoint, a net loss, but that's a healthy business, right? So I am pretty sure they're going to get a rejection letter. We're going to have to appeal, and then we're going to win because we can demonstrate that business is a healthy business. It was just that we just bought a bunch of taxable assets that get depreciated, right?
For you in Surfside Capital, what does your new client look like?
Well, that's a hard question because our clients are right now, we're spending a fair amount of money, a fair amount of people on skill sets on crisis management, right? Our typical client obviously is not coming to us through a crisis environment. Our typical client is a growth company, right? It's a company that has done very well in the JV team and they're ready to go to the varsity team. But to do that, they need a little bit of coaching in terms of marketing, HR, finance, capital management, access to PE and VC, right? Those are things that you don't learn on the internet. The access to the capital networks, putting together a good strategic plan document that you can pitch and get funded, right? Helping you think through the complexities of growing a business, which largely center around people, right? Those are the things that we would come in and we help that company extract or realize its maximum value, right? A lot of our clients come to us with an exiting plan. They say, okay, I want out in 5 million. My asset is worth today 5 million, but I want 25 million at the end of year 5, right? And we help them through that journey, right?
And we have, but right now, are you solely focused on the clients that you had prior to January? Or are you starting to accept new clients that you can?
Oh, we do both. I always, my partners and I have a very simple philosophy around helping the community back, particularly the Latino community, because 75% of the folks in my firm are Latino, right? And you don't see a lot of firms like Surfside Capital in the Latino community, right? So I think it's our responsibility to pick up the phone and answer some questions. We do that, right? That doesn't mean we're going to take on a client, right? But we have a conversation, right? And in some cases, we will take on a client, right? But we will listen to, we would have that consultation all the time, right? Particularly if it's a Latino-owned business.
So what do you recommend before they call you? Are you recommending that they put their accounts in order? Or
very good question, right? I think the first thing you need to do for anybody is, irrespective of your company size or industry, right? You gotta have a really good handle on your cash flow, right? And it's always surprising to me how many small business owners do not have a good handle on their cash flow, right? That is understanding where your cash flow projection is for the next 30, 60, and 90 days, what dollars are coming in and what dollars are going out. And that sounds very simple, but trust me, it is often not, right? Especially now. So that will allow us to have a conversation around your runway, your survival ratio, what do we need to cut, how much we need to borrow, that type of stuff, right? So really getting a good handle on your cash flow. And some of them come to us with, they've made some difficult decisions that let people go, but they're still hanging on to the idea that this COVID thing was going to pass in 30 days, right? And the reality is that as more data becomes available, this is likely to be no less than a 60 to 90 day event, right? So if the markets are telling you that this is a 60 to 90 day event, you should be reacting in a 60 to 90 day strategy, not a 30-day strategy, right? That means I would encourage everybody to assume that nothing's going to be normal between now and 4th of July, right? If you go into Wall Street, the bear market says that things are going to go all the way through Labor Day, right? And the bull market says all the way to 4th of July. I mean, the reality is that nobody knows. Nobody knows, right? And you got to be prepared for the worst and hope for the best.
Okay, so I run a small company. I need some help. I want to apply to the PPP, although I want to call it PPE.
Yeah.
So before I do that, I'm going to get my QuickBooks or whatever system I use and put it in play and put in all the stuff that I've been neglecting to do.
Yeah.
And then I call you.
Yeah. And have your bank account and says how much cash I have today. How much cash do I think I'm going to have 30 days from now? And that will be the start of a great conversation, right? You can find us at our website and also at info@surfcapadvisors.com. I don't know if there's a way to put that on, right?
Oh, Mama, okay. You're muted.
I put it onto the chat, so it's in there.
Okay, super duper. Do we have any more questions? So Mama, do you have any questions before we...
This is awesome. So I do financial advising, so I'm absolutely loving this conversation. I'm like, this is like very, very awesome. And it's interesting because there's a lot of companies that are just kind of...
Oh, we just lost you, Mama. You're muted.
Can't hear you.
So she was saying this was really awesome is what I heard. And I think it's wonderful because, I mean, in theory, you can go into the SBA, their website, you can get the information, but it feels so complicated. I know that it's not, but I've even gone in there and I'm thinking, oh my God, where do I go? However, having you just recently explain it really was helpful to me.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. If you have any questions, if you want to add anything else, Juan Carlos, I know this was a
look. The one thing I'd like to close it with is a lot of small businesses, a lot of people are getting sick out there. More are likely to come. So you just got to do everything you can to stay safe because it's really hard to deal with a financial crisis. It's a lot harder if you're sick. And that has happened already in one or two of my clients in which the CEO or the COO are sick, right? So now not only are we dealing with the crisis, but the people that are making the decisions are not 100%. So drink your milk, take your vitamins, have some orange juice, right? Stay socially distant. It's very important that you have a clear head when you're making decisions in times of crisis. And above all, remain calm because these too shall pass.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. Thank you for joining us. And the information was just what we needed to hear.
Great. I'm here for you all the time. Just, you know where to reach me.
This was perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.